During America's Industrial Revolution, we will see the rise of big business. Let's take a look at some terms and concepts that you will need to know. Capitalism is a free market system where businesses are privately owned and where supply and demand drives the market and determines prices. Individuals own and control the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. Maximizing your profits and creating wealth are great motivators in a capitalist system. Who starts these businesses? Entrepreneurs take the risk in starting a business in hopes of earning profits. Without entrepreneurs taking risks and investing time and money, there wouldn't be iPhones or Air Jordans. It worked out well for Mark Zuckerberg and a little company called Facebook. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, most businesses were either proprietorships and partnerships, which were too small to handle the demands of an expanding business during the Industrial Revolution. So corporations were created. Corporations sell stock to raise money to invest in their business. Stock is an actual piece of ownership of the company. People who own stock in a corporation are called stockholders, and they share a percentage of the company's profits, but they do not share in the company's debt. Corporations are managed and run by a board of directors that make decisions for the corporation. So why were corporations the new type of businesses needed? Well, it was necessary because business was expanding too far and too fast for one person to manage it. It also made it easier to raise money to invest in the company. People would buy stock in a company that was successful in hopes of making money. Corporations made taking your business national or international much more reasonable. Let's look at a few examples from America's Industrial Revolution. John D. Rockefeller started Standard Oil right here in Cleveland, Ohio, and soon controlled close to 90% of the nation's oil, making him the world's first billionaire. Convert Rockefeller's net worth to today, and he would have over $22 billion. Scottish immigrant Andrew Carnegie formed Carnegie Steel and soon dominated the U.S. steel industry, building steel plants in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Ever drive down Carnegie Road in downtown? Carnegie sold his business for $480 million, then gave away almost $300 million before he died. So how did Rockefeller, Carnegie, and others become so large, so wealthy, and so powerful? Most of what they did was illegal by today's laws. Many corporations joined together to form trusts. Imagine McDonald's, Burger King, and Subway merging together. These businesses would run as one company, and they could afford to drop their prices and put all of their competitors out of business. If the trust could control the industry, they would create what is known as a monopoly. Monopoly occurs when one business dominates and controls an entire industry. When you play the game, the objective is to own all the property on the board, and then everyone has to pay you. Because of the size of your company, you can slash your prices and force your competitors to go out of business. Once you control the industry, you can then raise prices or lower supply in order to force the customer to pay whatever you want because they have no other options. So how do you create a monopoly? Step one is to use vertical integration. That means going up. For example, Rockefeller used vertical integration, which means he owned all his oil wells. He owned the company that made the barrels in which he stored the oil. He owned the refinery that refined the oil into gasoline, kerosene, and other byproducts like Vaseline. He owned the pipeline which moved the oil, and he also owned the oil tankers which sent it on railroads across the country. So how does this benefit Rockefeller? By using vertical integration, he owns and controls almost everything he needs to get his oil to the marketplace. If he didn't, he would have to pay other companies to do these things for him. This would force Rockefeller to keep his prices high to cover his costs, but because he doesn't have to pay any middlemen, he's able to save that money, reduce his costs, and maximize his profits. This leads us to horizontal integration. Because Standard Oil produces so much oil at such low costs, they can afford to sell for low prices. Standard Oil moves into a new area with other smaller companies and immediately cuts their prices, forcing their competition to do the same. Since the other businesses are smaller and their costs are higher, they cannot compete with Rockefeller, and he eventually drives them out of business, buying up their oil wells and making his company even bigger and more powerful. Rockefeller thoroughly enjoyed this sport of business and drove almost every single one of his competitors out of business. These tactics, which are now illegal, gave Standard Oil a monopoly of oil in the U.S. So the question is, where's the government in all this? Well, this time the government had a philosophy of laissez-faire, which means the government kept their hands off of American business and did not interfere with what was happening in the market. Because there were no rules or laws, owners could do whatever they wanted and use this freedom to make millions of dollars. Most of the money corporations made was done completely illegally. As you will learn, progressive reformers wanted to put an end to the power of the monopolies, and in 1890 the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed and was eventually used in 1906 to rule Standard Oil as a monopoly and force the breakup of the company. Morgan's U.S. Steel was the first billion-dollar company, but was not a monopoly. The law has since been used to break up AT&T or Ma Bell in the 1980s, and most recently Microsoft in 1999. Poor Bill Gates.
created using Powtoon.